Hello everybody and welcome to another UTC commentary. This time we're doing things a little different. I'm actually recording a visual of the pages that you can read along with me while I'm talking about it, as opposed to an audio MP3. The reason I've decided to do that is because one, it'll be easier for you to access. Instead of just downloading an MP3 and playing it on your own, but you can just call up YouTube and watch the video. And the second reason is because there's a few pages that I would like to talk about in depth in terms of layout and composition, as well as there will probably be a few other visual points I'd want to point out, zoom in on, and stuff like that. So hopefully this little experiment's going to work out, and I might do commentaries this way from now on. We'll see how it goes. And as always, please give me your feedback if you like this format. That's great, and let me know. If you'd rather I stick to audio commentaries, maybe you want to listen to these in the car at work or something, I totally understand that. I've done that before with podcasts. So let me know in the comments what you'd like to see from these commentaries moving forward. And if there's any questions or talking points you'd like me to touch upon when I'm doing these commentaries. Again, I'm not going to... This is different, so I'm not going to actually edit out a lot of my stuttering, and you're going to hear a lot more ums than usual, and that's because I have to edit about 100 or so ums out of each hour-long commentary. So I apologize in advance. I'm going to try to do that as little as possible, but I say that to myself every time I do a commentary, and it never happens. Anyway, let's get right down to business. This chapter is about Flint primarily, and secondarily it's about Noah. This is because, well, they're both awesome characters and they're both main characters in Phase 2, but this story is actually a mashup of two different stories that I had been developing for about a year before this comic came out. Well, not even actually a year before. We're at a point in UTC where these stories are more fresh to me as a creator. When I first started planning the series, I knew I wanted to do a thing with Cass and Flint, of course, to start off the series. But later on, I knew like Noah would have a transformation into a salamander, and I knew I wanted to have a shrinking chapter because that's a thing you see a lot in especially like Disney cartoons and stuff like that. There's always a shrinking episode in each series they had on like the Disney afternoon. And also I wanted to have a chapter that was set on Halloween. And so I had these ideas in mind even before the very first strip of the comic hit the internet. And so those stories had been in my head for years and years before I actually went ahead and wrote and drew them. But this story is very fresh. I started writing this around the time that Jeff was writing Chapter 8. And so while he was working on his script for Chapter 8, I was coming up with ideas for the follow-up chapter. And I had two ideas. I had a story about Noah, and I had a story about Flint. And I actually took the best parts of both stories and I combined them. And it worked great. On their own, those stories were all right, but missing something. Together, Flint fulfilled part of the hole that was in Noah's story that wasn't making it work, and Noah fulfilled a role in Flint's story that helped make Flint's story work a lot more plausibly than before. The story is about Flint wanting to become more squirrel-like, and Noah enables that. And the two have, I think, a really good dynamic in as far as that's concerned, and I didn't actually see it coming until I looked at what was going on with the chapters I was writing and said, wow, Noah should just work with Flint on this, and that'll achieve a lot of the goals that I had for Noah's story, and at the same time it'll help Flint get his story off the ground. So the cover was tough to figure out a cover for this one because I didn't want to spoil the action sequence that I was writing, and at the time the action all took place indoors. There was no track team, there was no exteriors for that chase. It was all through the school, and so I had this classroom in mind. Noah wasn't written to be in the scene, so I didn't literally take a scene from the chapter as I had written it at that point. And I didn't want to quite reveal Ramses yet, so I had this sort of abstracted cheetah mouth becoming the frame of the picture, and you see Noah and Flint doing what they're doing. And that's kind of it. I'm not too happy with it overall, like, I think if I had more time, like, if I could do a do-over, I might try a totally different composition. But for what it is, I mean, for the purpose that it serves, I think it's pretty good. And I like the sheen I gave Noah there. I want to have more time to, like, work on each page and color it and stuff, and we'll probably see in Phase 3 a much more shaded, dimensional touch to the coloring, but for right now I'm just trying to get the pages out on time and other stuff. So unfortunately Noah's not going to look quite as good as he does in the cover here on the inside pages. So let's get right to the inside. This is the first chapter that takes place over a series of days, and that's kind of like a storytelling thing I've always done. If you've ever read any of my earlier series, like Unfamiliar Reflection especially, a lot of my stories happen in one day. The characters never go to bed. They never, like, put off the conflict or the whatever the problem is of the story. They're always going to just address the conflict until it's resolved, and then everybody goes away, presumably to have dinner or sleep or whatever. And that's kind of it. This was one of the first chapters to have more than one day depicted. And it's definitely the first to go over a span of days, especially on page 1. Every single panel is a different day, and I try not to do captions or anything like that for my stories. I really try to make the visuals and the narrative speak for itself, and I don't like calling out the next day or 5 hours later and stuff like that. I feel like that's something that should be more implied and understood by the reader just by looking at the transitions between panels, as opposed to just having the comic straight up say, this is what's happening. But for this chapter, there really wasn't much avoiding it. I wanted to make absolutely sure that the readers understood the flow of time, and because so much is happening over a series of days, it was important to get the pacing. And the other reason was because we're jumping back in time to before Chapter 7. October 28th, which is the first day we see here, that's the day after Flint's party in Chapter 6. When they're holding a party in the backyard at the Calloway's house for Flint coming back to school, this is the very next day he's at school for the first time since transforming. And then we see over the course of days just how his situation changes. And a lot of this was based on my personal experience in school, the way that I was kind of... I was as naive as Flint was here. I was really just focused on myself and things that I like to do, and I didn't really develop a lot of social cues until later on in my development. So Flint's just all about him being a squirrel, and he's like, this is awesome. And for a while people are like, oh, that's cool, yeah. And as it goes on, you know, it's just like, okay, he's telling more stories. That's pretty annoying. He's a one-note guy. And that was kind of, you know, that was kind of something I experienced in middle school and a little bit of high school. And I didn't recognize what was going on until years later. I looked back on my life and I was like, yeah, that's what went wrong. That's what I could have done better. I like to think I'm a little better than that now. But this is still, Flint's young, he's still learning. So I created some characters for him, and unfortunately they didn't get enough exposure in the comic. We have Mike, his best friend, and Ainsley, his second best friend, I guess. They're the closest friends that Flint has outside of his family, and he, you know, he's presumably hanging out with them a lot. And I wanted them to have a bit more to do in the comic. I had a whole side plot where Mike's trying to run for student council, and Flint is like the one. Flint is his Achilles heel, basically. As Flint becomes less popular, Mike's association with Flint is something that drives a lot of students away, and Kyle here, he's really like, yeah, you're gonna have to, you know, buck this guy. He's dead weight for you as a up-and-coming politician. And we had another scene. I cut it out because there just wasn't room in the comic, and I'm kind of upset I did. And that would have fleshed out that story a little more. As it is, we only get back to it towards the end. But that's what happens when you're trying to keep to a 22-page format. I'm really strict about it for really just strictly professional reasons, as I've already said. That's the way that is. So the next page is when we enter, when the villain enters. This is Ramses. He is a jerk. He's trying to basically take over Flint's thing, and if you've read the comic, which you should have by now, then you'll know all about his story. I hated gym class, so I could think of nothing better but to have gym class be the setting we keep coming back to whenever Flint has an encounter with Ramses. So it worked because Ramses wants to become a track star, and that's gym class, so it worked really well. The coach I based off of Sergeant Slaughter, loosely, just for the profile and the glasses, of course. But there's something, I made a mistake. The coach says that's a foul because Flint used his arm to hit the ball. That's actually something that one of my roommates pointed out to me. At the time, I was living with a few guys that I was just getting to know. I lived in an apartment for just a very short time, and I moved during production on this issue, actually. But when I started out, I was making these pages in the summer of 2014, and one of my roommates was actually interested in my work, and he saw me drawing, and he's like, "What's this?" And so when he was reading the comic, he said, "That's not a foul, that's a handball." And I was like, "Oh." So the page was already out, and I didn't really know what else to do about it, so I was like, I'm just going to leave it, and every time we come back to the coach, he's going to get another rule wrong. So I ended up writing the coach as somebody who just did not actually understand the rules of soccer. And coincidentally, the World Cup was airing around this time too, so I learned everything I know about soccer. I learned watching the World Cup that summer. So as time went on, like, I was able to recognize, you know, what rules actually are and what calls would be made against players in soccer. So we'll get back to that when we see the coach again. Third page here. And again, another transitory page where we just see things continuing to deteriorate for Flint. Even his friends are getting a little annoyed with him. And again, that's something that, like, I ended up distancing myself from a lot of friends, not on purpose, but because I was a really annoying kid in the 6th and 7th grade. I'm not saying I deserved the bullying I got, because I didn't, but I definitely could have done more to make myself less of a target. And a lot of those lessons I put into this issue to help further Flint's narrative. Flint's still very much about what's going on with just him. He's not really talking with Ainsley and Mike as much as he's talking to them. And even they're getting a little annoyed with him. And this panel here with the fire drill, that's based directly on an incident that happened with me embarrassing my best friend in front of a bunch of his friends. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I made a joke, and the joke wasn't funny at all, and I basically, later on, he was like, "Dude, that's not cool." I'm like, oh, sorry, I recognize it now, and I'm sorry. And that was kind of it. That was all it amounted. It didn't amount to anything in real life, but I decided to make it a big plot point here. And there would have been a scene where Mike had basically, like, later on Mike's to Flint, like, "Look, I am trying to run for council, and you're embarrassing me every time you hang out with me. That's, you know, if you want to be my friend, you got to be more careful about that." Like, I had that scene. It didn't quite gel with me. I didn't know how quite to write it, and I was running out of room in the comic anyway, so it got cut. So that's, I think, the last time we see Mike for a while. And Ramses just keeps growing. Another positive thing about having a bunch of days go by is you get to see a nice drawn-out transformation sequence, which the comic has been sorely lacking as of now. Next page. Nice scene with Noah and Cass, and I'm kicking myself now because I had it in mind to draw the stuffed wolf that Flint gives Cass in the short story that I wrote called Sister. I wanted to have him in the background on her bed for continuity, but I totally forgot, and I didn't think about it until months later. I looked back, I was like, oh man, that wolf needed to be there, but minor thing. He'll pop up later. I'm addressing some stuff about the mucus, and I really tried to think of, like, what are all the ways their relationship could just, like, hit hurdles? Like, how could they be in a relationship, but like, okay, we're two completely different species at this point. What's going to happen between us that we're not prepared for? And Noah being a salamander, he secretes a layer of mucus across his entire body, which is incredibly disgusting, so we're calling that out. Really wasn't sure if the punchline to this page was something I should have had in, but I decided to keep it anyway. It's innocent enough, I suppose, if you don't know, if you're not really reading too much into it. And 13's in this comic as well, because I really, really, really wanted to follow up on what we saw at the end of Chapter 7 when Morty wants Cass to become her godmother and sort of show her, you know, grow her as a person, as a social creature, show her how real people behave and take her out into the world, things that Morty just can't do for her. So this shopping scene was really good because it allowed me to bring 13 along for a little bit, and she gets a nice little scene for character building purposes, and I really enjoyed drawing that. But also at the same time, we get to have a scene where Noah is shopping for new clothes for Flint, because Flint's wearing a lot of Cass's old stuff. This is probably the last time you're going to see the February shirt Flint's wearing. I really like that shirt. It's a Spoonie Experiment reference, if you're familiar with that online reviewer. It's the idea is that's actually like a band shirt that Cass had for the last like decade, and she isn't wearing it anymore because it's incredibly old. And this is like the band February had a tour in 2011. That's kind of the idea behind what this shirt is. So it's like a kind of reference, but not really. And she just didn't want it anymore, so she cut it up so that Flint could use it. Flint was just using a lot of hand-me-downs, and from now on he's probably going to be wearing more customized shirts. Well, I guess from now on he's not going to be wearing any shirts at all, but we'll get to that. This we've seen before in Terror of the Jackal, Chapter 7. This graphic I made entirely in Photoshop. I penciled in some idea for what the cells and the nanobots would look like, and then I thought, well, wait a minute, let's not actually look at the cells in real life. Let's actually look at them through some kind of spectrometer microscope thingy. So I made this like digital thing, and I upped the noise in Photoshop and used some fuzzy brushes to create that effect. Yep, that's same thing up here. And this scene was put in just because I needed some kind of quick event that they needed to be recovering from that I wouldn't have put in a full story. Weight gain transformations are a thing. I'm not a big fan of them. I'm not saying that it's not cool if people like that or not. I really do want UTC to have a representation of all the different types of transformations anybody could want to have in a series. Unfortunately, because a lot of them aren't up my alley, I want to give them some service, but I don't want to spend too much time on them. And the weight gain was just something like, okay, well, this is something, it's got to go in the comic at some point, and it's a funny scene. I really like how the scene plays out. As a neat freak, I did not enjoy drawing the mess. I just did not enjoy that, but I hope the scene plays out funny. And I liked the idea that, you know, these things keep happening, and it was about time Morty got a transformation. I didn't have any other plans to have Morty experience some kind of transformation himself yet. So now at this point, all the main characters have officially changed in some fashion. So now we're back into the real story. Noah's just trying to get the machine. The one big thing that I'd been leaving hanging all phase, I never addressed until this point, was the machine that Morty had created from Noah's designs that had been used to transform Karis. And that machine fixed a lot of problems for them in Phase 1, and we don't see it again. And there's a reason for that, and I was going to address it earlier in the phase, but I just hadn't found a good way to do that until this chapter. Noah is all about getting that machine back. Jen had confiscated it, and he wants it back. And Jen is like, you recognize that thing almost killed us, and if you hadn't been absolutely miraculously perfectly correct in your calculations, it would have killed us had you used it on us instead of reverting us back to normal. So this is like this is Noah's character arc. He's he's written to be a very reckless guy. I mean, the whole salamander thing was on him. He probably didn't need it to save Karis from the fire, but he used it anyway, and he had no way of turning it off, and it's still transforming him. And he has to learn how to deal with the repercussions of these things. It doesn't matter that he's been right every time he's made an experiment, because you know what happens when something goes wrong, and that's the gist of what Jen's trying to say to him here. A lot of dialogue, but I think I did a pretty good job with the dialogue in this chapter. I try to talk out loud. I try to speak the script out loud to make sure that it doesn't sound too rambly or too like clunky. Noah's finally realizing, okay, you know, I do have to dial it back. Another gym scene. So the intentional grounding thing, this time I'm actually writing him on purpose to be an incompetent coach. My roommate had a joke that I didn't put in, and I wish I could remember it because it was pretty good too, but it didn't quite fit this scenario, so we couldn't use it. Oh, traveling. He was going to have the coach get one of the students on traveling with the ball, which is a basketball term. It doesn't have any application in soccer, so that probably would have worked in some capacity. But in this particular point, like I wanted Ramses to be extremely physically violent with Flint, so he knocks him down, and that's what makes the coach call it intentional grounding. Which, for all you non-sports aficionados, that's a football penalty. Not European football, because this is European football, but American football. Okay, let's move on. This scene was something I slipped in right at the end. I had just about buttoned up the script, and then I looked back through, and I'm like, Scurry has to be in this chapter. If we're focusing on Flint, we've got to put Scurry in here in some capacity, but I didn't have anything for him to do. And so I'm like, well, wait a minute. Winter's coming anyway, so Scurry's going to have to get written out of the story soon no matter what. He's going to have to hold back up in his den. So I wrote this page to write Scurry out of the story, and it ended up paralleling really well with what Flint was going through. Scurry is leaving him at a time when Flint needs all the friends he can get. And this is my favorite scene in the chapter. I really, really enjoyed writing the dialogue here and just everything that goes with it. Flint starts out being selfish, wanting Scurry to stay for his own sake, and then he sees how much it hurts Scurry to even be telling him this, that he has to go. And, you know, they really come together for each other here, and it's really fun. It's really sweet. Taking a shiny candy wrapper as a memento. And here, I like this, you know, I love the way the scene progresses. I wish I had done the less is more approach. I wish I hadn't actually drawn Flint crying. I should have taken this panel here, and I should have duplicated it down here, enlarged it, and then erased Flint from it, so you're just seeing the empty window, and then you see a little tiny shaky text box of him crying to show that he is sunken down behind the window, but we don't see him. I think this is a bit showing too much, but that's a lesson learned. And I still think the scene gets it across pretty well anyway. And so I placed it at that point in the chapter because it segues great into Flint's growing desperation to have some kind of solution to his bully problem. So right when Scurry leaves the next day, to add even more problems, Noah says, I have a way to change you, but it's not perfect and it's dangerous and I'm not going to give it to you. I purposely drew this backpack being open here so that once to visually hint that, okay, Flint has access to it. Noah turns his head for 1 minute, and by the time he's walking out of the door, he's actually discreetly taken the device and he's put it in his own backpack. And I really hated saying, you're a plucky little guy. I tried rewriting that line a lot, and I just hated it. I'm like, what if I leave it in and then have Flint call it back? So down here, Flint throws the word pluck back, and that was my way of dealing with that bad line of dialogue that I didn't know what to do with. And Cass is getting a little more suspicious. She was supposed to have more of a role in the story. I didn't have a lot of time to spend with her, and it kind of hurt the pacing of the story. I like bouncing between Flint and Noah, and then occasionally to Cass. It felt a little bit off, and unfortunately it makes Cass a little more diminished in the story. She's supposed to be the detective. She had a couple of scenes where she overheard bits of conversation, and she picked up on a couple of things that weren't quite right, and she was supposed to do more to like put the pieces together and figure out, you know, Noah's doing something to Flint, isn't he? As it is in the issue, I ended up just writing this one scene where Cass talks to July, she's a reuse of an extra from the previous story with one of Karis's friends. I decided to reuse the character for this for continuity reasons. I keep a database of all the students. On the new UTC website, you can actually look in the characters, on the character tags for each page. I have numbered every unnamed student that has appeared in Attic High in the background, because I want to try and keep track of like who these characters are, and you know, some of them might get an expanded role later on, like I've done with Katsuko. So this is July, and she's basically setting up the next chapter while at the same time helping Cass further the plot of this chapter. So Ramsey's brother Reed is doing stuff that's not cool, and Cass sort of puts two and two together here. It's a bit on the nose. I wish I could have given Cass more time and clues to put together instead of just almost handing it to her, but she does still do a little bit of intuition, so that she is still being proactive about it, and that was important because I want to see Cass being more proactive about more discrete things. But she already knew that Reed Steele was working on Cheetah stuff because she and Noah and everybody had been investigating these students. So she goes right to Noah and is like, hey, you reported this guy named Reed for a cheetah thing, and I think I know what's going on here. And then she also calls back something I'd set up in Chapter 7. There's a page, and I'll actually call it up here. Because I can do this now. On this page in Chapter 7, up here in the corner, I purposely drew this in because I was planning to do something with Noah experimenting on Flint's stuff. I picked the low-res files, sorry, but up here it's got the exact same stack of DNA samples that we saw in that previous page in Chapter 9. And so I had planned for Cass to actually notice this, not say anything in this chapter, but just sort of notice it and go, huh, he's got a lot of Flint samples here. More than mine. Why is that? And the idea was I was already planning on having Flint do some kind of research I was already planning on having Noah do some kind of research into Flint's condition for future development, which ended up becoming the story of this chapter. So that's stuff I like to do. I try to do that whenever I have like an idea. I seed a chapter with something that I could call back to, just as a way of building up continuity, hinting at things to come, and building the world. And so now we get to a really action-filled part, a fun part. The relay race that turns Ramses almost completely into a feral cheetah. Flint's had it. He's like, okay, this is going down. Ramses is already starting to like growl a little bit, and so he's growling a little into his words. So Flint's just like, something's gonna go wrong here, and I need to be prepared for it. So I need to fly right now. In the original script, this was not as dramatic as it is. In the original script, he gets into a fight, I think in like a hallway or something, and Ramses just starts changing in the hallway, and everybody's around like just starts screaming and running, and they get chased through the school. But it was all indoors, and it wasn't as dynamic as the scene is here. We have a whole track team in danger. Flint's up on the top of the bleachers, and I had a really good opportunity to make a page that was laid out in a different kind of way to show the transformation and to show the relationship spatially between the characters. We see how high up Flint is. The bleachers are pretty high, and if he falls, the potential for him to hurt something if it's wrong is there. And also he's high enough that he can glide pretty far to get where he needs to go. So I laid this out, and I'm like, okay, so we'll see the transformation of Ramses falling. He's falling to all fours here. You can't quite see it, but that's a third paw in the background. So I'm trying to show that Ramses is actually dropping to all fours during the run. Running is triggering like the mental change in him. He wants to keep going faster, and he's sort of starting to tap into this carnal instinct of the cheetah. And meanwhile, Flint is changing. His wing flaps are growing, tearing his clothes, and he's shrinking. You don't quite see the shrinking. You can sort of tell, but the perspective's a little weird, but we don't quite see that yet. But we're starting to see, the full transformation from his half cheetah self, his half squirrel self, to his 3/4 squirrel self. And yeah, so I just loved drawing this page. It was really challenging, but it was really rewarding at the same time. And you get this great downward progression. So there's 3 columns down the page, but your eye knows where to go. You can start up here. Clock King that's actually that's a reference to Batman the Animated Series. My favorite villain from that show was the Clock King. So that's the brand of the stopwatch. So you go down the page. You can go down the page 3 ways. You go down here, on the left side, you can see Flint transforming in close-up. In the middle, you see the device falling, and that creates the noise, the clacking, that attracts the attention of the rest of his class. I should have drawn this at a different angle, because as it is, it actually looks like the track is part of this panel, because the perspective lines are almost the same. I should have just made this like a straight horizontal line or something to make it more obvious. But that's a separate panel. It's them at the bottom of the bleachers looking back and up at Flint transforming. And then down the right side of the page, you start with Ramses transforming, and then you cut to Flint, who is finished transforming, and he's running and jumping. Next page, another somewhat dynamic one, action-filled. This is a great shot there. I really, really like that shot. And he's flying to Ramses. Ramses is basically, he's off the track and he's coming right at the guys. I didn't have a lot of room to depict this. I was like, okay, I got to really show the setup of the spatial orientation. Where's the class? Where's Flint? Where's Ramses? All in relation to each other. And I hope I matched the line of sight here. You see the coach here, and this is now switching 180 degrees from his perspective, and Ramses is coming at them. And then boom. And then Flint. We don't see characters transform very quickly without a lot of pain in this comic. When Karis transformed in Chapter 1, she went through so much pain it actually drove her mad. And Ramses is also turning feral, so the rapid change that he's suddenly experienced on the track, that's probably done something to him as well. Cass, when she changed a little bit further into a goat in Chapter 3, that was painful to her as well, so I had to call out the fact that Flint's actually in a lot of pain right now due to the rapid transformation. I try to keep the science, I try to keep my faux science conventions as consistent as possible, even though they're completely made up. So now Ramses is just totally chasing after Flint because he just hates Flint at this point. We're finally getting back to the Mike subplot with him running for council. He lost the seat. I left it open to their interpretation whether or not he lost the seat because people just didn't want to vote for him, if he lost the seat because people, because of his relationship with Flint, and people didn't like that. So we never know for sure, but Kyle here seems to think, I never changed that. Oh no, All right, I'm going to have to eat humble pie here. I called him Kyle earlier, and then I changed his name to James. And I didn't remember naming him before. So when I came to do this page, it was months after. Like 2 or 3 months later, I drew this page. And I forgot I'd named him. So I was trying to think of a name for him. Like, I'm going to name him after myself, because if I'm going to ever have a character in this comic named after me, it should be a villain. It should be somebody who is totally not the kind of person that I am. So let's do this jerkwad James. Let's do that. Anyway, that's my fault. That's in the print version of the comic and everything, so it's way too late to change it. So I apologize. That's a really big continuity screw up. I guess he's just gonna have a hyphenated name like James Kyle or Kyle James or something. I don't know. We'll probably never see him again, so it's a moot point. Anyway, here comes Ramses and Flint. They are now chasing themselves through the school. Finally, I'm sort of getting back to a version of the ending that I had originally written. It is still very different from what I had written, though. I try to change up the shots. This is a worm's eye view shot of them busting through the door. The layouts of these pages, they're very tight, but I really tried to depict as much action in these as I could. Tight framing as much as possible to really, show the intensity of it. You only see part of a character's face. Here, I needed to show, this is the first time we see Flint in relation to a real human, so I had to show just how small he'd gotten at this point. And then now that we know how big Flint is, we can understand that Ainsley would be able to pick him up and throw him. It's about the size of a medium-sized dog or something like that. And probably weighs even less. And because he weighs less, he can now glide. Ramses jumps. Breaks his leg because they were on the 3rd floor. That was actually painful to draw. It's painful to even look at. Yeah. I tried playing with the layouts a little bit here too. He's gliding from the left to the right, but he's also gliding down. He's losing air, so I framed the panels so that you see it go from left to right and top to bottom, diagonally down. And then the other establishing shots that show what's happening to Ramses and show what's happening to these guys, we get to see those in the negative space. Cass and Flint have arrived. The Cass thing was, again, because we didn't get to see her a lot in this chapter, I wasn't sure exactly how to have her react to the situation. But I think it comes across, I think she has a balanced approach to it. She's really upset by it, but at the same time, she knows that Flint did this to himself because he really, really wanted it. And so she's like scared for him, but she's also like, well, at least he's happy for now. So she's kind of like this balanced, like in-between state of worry and comforting. And happy that Flint's at least happy in his naivete. I should have drawn Morty a little more fat. It's only been 2 days since the weight gain incident, so he should have been like much more bloated, and I should have framed him so that we could see more of like his pudge, because he does have a stomach. The lines just didn't quite match in this picture. And again, I had a caption here that says soon. I just put that in because I didn't feel like I had properly transitioned the page from the previous page to this one. So I just was like, okay, I'm just going to put a soon box in there so everyone understands that we've skipped ahead in time. And Jen's there too, so that Noah can deliver his line. Jen's only here because of, so that Noah could just have a final conversation with her. I suppose she would have gone with them. I I never had a scene where they went to her and brought her along, but you can assume that there was like a situation where Cass is like, we're going to Flint's school right now because something bad's probably going to happen. And they'd probably tell Jen about it and bring her along, which probably, no, it did happen. It had to have happened, otherwise she wouldn't be there. All right. Yeah, a lot of this part of the chapter just sort of came together without me even having to really think about it because the pieces were all set up, which is great. I have a huge headache trying to set up all the pieces, but once the pieces are in place, it's pretty easy to write after that. It's like, okay, this will happen because of this, and that'll happen because of this and this and this, which were set up earlier. So these pages, it's all falling action. We get to see Mike and Ainsley just one more time, being friends to him. 13 doing her thing. There's probably some confusion on the whole locked, unlocked thing. Flint's DNA is still a little bit fluctuated because the nanobots that Morty gave him were supposed to go to Demetrius. So the nanobots were looking for an exact type of DNA, an exact code, and Flint's doesn't quite match because he was a different person than Demetrius. So it left a little bit of wiggle room for me to open up Flint for future transformations, which I'd always wanted him to experience. So while the nanobots were locking him down his DNA, they were susceptible to be reactivated. Much the way that Morty had accidentally reactivated Cass's nanobots. But whereas that was uncontrolled, Noah was trying to find a way to use the wonkiness of Flint's nanobots to actually his advantage and control them a little bit, which is how Flint is able to transform a little bit further into a squirrel, but not all the way. When Cass was at Morty's mansion in Chapter 3, she could have transformed all the way into a goat, but Morty and 13 shut down the machine before that happened. Flint, if Noah hadn't calibrated the device properly enough, it would have happened to Flint too. He would have been a complete squirrel, and he wouldn't be able to talk or stand upright or anything like that. So this final panel is huge. That is important for Flint's character development. He is basically, for all intents and purposes, Flint is UTC's first transhuman character. He identifies with his new species. It's basically his spirit animal. And we knew this going in, that he wanted to be more like a squirrel. He wanted to glide. He wanted to, you know, do all the fun squirrel things that he wanted to do that he wasn't getting allowed to do. And a lot of the characters treat this development as a loss for Flint, whereas Flint treats it as a victory, and that's a very powerful story setup for future characterization and for future stories because of how different the characters view this situation. Flint loves this. It hurt, and things were scary for a little bit, but now that he's locked down again, he's not worried anymore. He got exactly what he wanted, even if it's not what other people want for him. And this scene I wrote as a follow-up to the Scurry scene. So this, again, was a late addition to the chapter. The paper, the foil wrapper that Scurry had taken from Flint is what's being reflected back here. And I hope that reads. It's a way for me to sort of close this chapter in Flint and Scurry's relationship without it being a total downer. They still have a connection to each other, albeit tenuous. They're still living very close to each other. Scurry's only right there in the backyard, somewhere way deep out in the woods, but still close enough that they can still have some kind of connection. And so the flashlight, which was just originally Flint's way of signaling to Scurry, hey, I'm home, come on over. And now Scurry has a way of saying, hey, I'm over here, I'm still good. And so that gives Flint enough comfort that he's able to go to sleep. So yeah, this whole chapter was long overdue. A lot of you guys are Flint fans, and I'm right there with you. I knew going into chapter 2 that Flint needed to have more focus. So I gave him stuff to do in chapter 6, chapter 7. Those were very much, I was trying to further him as a character and give him more exciting things to do. And this chapter finally, his arc hasn't concluded yet, but it has put him on a new level. And I am really, really happy that he's gotten to this point, and I'm excited to continue writing stories about where he's going to be going from now on. But for now, we're going to move on to another chapter where it's going to be an ensemble. Everybody's going to get something to do and something to, react to, and the whole school is going to be in danger. So we'll catch you next time. I might do another one of these visual commentaries, or it might go back to MP3s. Please comment, reply with any questions, concerns, anything that I can do to improve these commentaries. I hope I didn't say too much. Oh, I just did it again. Anyway, I'm glad you guys are continuing to enjoy UTC. I want to thank all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. The new UTC website, located at utc-comic.com, that exists because of you guys. I had enough time to be able to take an online course, learn WordPress, and put a new site together, code it to be unique and serve the exact functions of the comic. It's only going to keep getting better. I'm going to add features to it constantly, and hopefully this is going to be the home of UTC for a long time to come, and it's thanks to you guys and your support. So I want to thank everybody who has helped donate to the cause, and thank you for just for reading. If you haven't contributed anything but your time, a friendly email, any word of support is much appreciated. Any shares on social media, anything like that. UTC is a story that I really, really want as many people as possible to enjoy. And I'm so glad to be hearing from so many of you words of encouragement and just words of like, yeah, Flint, awesome, way to go. And like, I hope things are okay with Cass and Noah, and Morty's going along pretty good. I kind of hate him a little bit, but he's funny, and anything like that is awesome. So thank you very much for continuing to read, for listening to this whole commentary. I hope it was insightful and entertaining. Until next time, take it easy.